Take your Bibles, please, and turn to 1 Kings chapter 20. 1 Kings chapter 20. As you're turning there, let me remind you men who are in the choir, you have a short practice right at the church this evening to go over your song for Sunday morning. All of you guys in the choir, and Kevin Stroud, if you don't mind joining them, that'd be good. All right, and at least you're invited. Okay, just a little humor there in that part of the room, but just kidding. But we're going to sing after the service and go over our music, okay? 1 Kings chapter 20. Now, we're talking about all kinds of borders, as you can tell by the way it's spelt in your outline. We are aware of the problem. We appreciate the encouragement with that because it happens. I will tell you, we have multiple proofreaders. You say, well, you got to get new proofreading. Well, good luck with that one. It's just, we have multiple people who proof our stuff most of the time. And we had one, it just happens. If you've ever been in publication, you know it can happen. So, but we appreciate your kindness and your help with that, okay? All right, so 1 Kings chapter 20, we're talking about borders, the battle that we talked about earlier in Ukraine, about borders, right? What is actually the border of Russia, okay? That is not a first time. Germany tried to change it, did they not? If you know your history. And then Russia changed it back. In fact, if you know your history, World War II history, you know that one of the fears that Churchill had, and one of the things that he had his military men work on towards the end of World War II, what were they going to do if Russia got to what was called East Germany and decided not to stop, and decided to go to West Germany, and then decided to go to take Poland, and they took Poland, but take France and keep coming, but basically replace Hitler. That was a real concern because of the size of their army. So borders has always been an issue, has it not? You know, one of the uniquenesses about America, and I'm proud to be an American, I'm glad to be an American, I know we have all of our faults, but we are, I think, the only country in the history of known civilization to spend so much money and so many lives to conquer land that we never intended to keep. We didn't conquer it to keep it. We didn't conquer France in a sense to keep France, or Germany to keep Germany, or Japan to keep Japan. And I said, well, we got plenty of faults. I know that, so I don't know to go. I'm just saying, though, that borders are a significant issue, okay? Now, this evening, we're going to finish the life of Ahab. And we talked about Ahab, and we took a little detour, in a sense, and away from Ahab in chapter 19, when we dealt for 2 weeks with the prophet and his depression and anxiety, and we dealt with that. And hopefully, I think some of you mentioned that you found that helpful, and I'm glad, and hopefully it was. If that kind of thing interests you, then go online and look at the old messages from a couple of weeks ago, and maybe that can encourage your heart if you're battling with depression or anxiety or so forth. But in chapter 20, we go back to the life of Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom, and Ahab, now a very wicked king, in chapter 20 and chapter 21 and chapter 22, is going to have his final three major narrative pieces. His life is going to unfold here and then eventually end over a period of a couple of years. Now, we're not going to obviously read verse by verse or even large passages at all because we have no time for anything else tonight, which would not be a bad exercise, but that's not what we're going to do tonight. We're going to hit the major points, like go over these three chapters at about 30,000 feet and sort of understand what's going on, okay? Now, in chapter 20, just to give you an overview, in chapter 20, what you have is a situation, look at verse 1 of chapter 20, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. Now, Ben-Hadad is a title, not a name, but a title. It's like the Pharaoh king. It's just the title he was getting, like Mr. President. That was his title. This name appeared in chapter 15 of 1 Kings. Now, whether it was the same one or his son, we don't know. So this guy in Syria, now Syria took the space in this time about the same place it has now between Iraq and Turkey and Jordan, Israel, that sphere of land. That's what it was back here during this time. So this king comes with 32 kings with him. Okay, and what does that mean? Oh, these kings here should not be understood as kings like the king of England or the king of Russia, or the emperor of Japan, with large countries underneath them, but more like city-states that would have been under the control of Syria. And they're going to come to Ahab in the north and saying, I want your stuff, okay? I want to get your stuff out. I want you to pay me money. And so they're going to conquer him. And in chapter 20, what you're going to find is God is extremely gracious to Ahab, this wicked guy, and provides for him grace. But there's some boundaries to understand and some boundaries to be aware of. Chapter 21 is the story of Naboth and him stealing the vineyard from Naboth through his wife and killing him and then taking it to make it a garden. And then in chapter 22, you have the final military event in Ahab's life where he winds up getting killed. Okay, so those are the three events that we have. So here's the first one. And we're going to, as I read them this week and meditated upon them, this is what I came up with. And hopefully let me encourage your heart, encourage my heart to help me understand a couple of things. First of all, borders. First of all, the border of grace. The border of grace. You have here, okay, the Syrian king that's named here Ben-Hadad, which is also, by the way, in some Bible translations is named Aram, A-R-A-M. So your translation may have one or the other. It's the same. It's the two terms for the same position, the king of Syria. And he comes and he's going to conquer them. And what happens, well, look what happens if you would please. And verse 2, he sent messages to Ahab, the king of Israel. And he says in verse 3, thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives also and thy children, even the goodliest are mine. Okay? And and the king of Israel answered and said, my Lord, O king, according to thy saying, I am thine in all that I have. So you would think, well, you've got peace. This is like Chamberlain, going back to World War II, making peace with Hitler. They're going to make peace here and everything's okay. You can have my stuff. I'm going to come and get all your stuff that you have, king. He said, okay, but then we still have peace. Okay, verse 5, okay? And the messenger came again and said, thus spake Ben-Hadad, saying, although I have sent unto thee, saying, thou shalt deliver to me thy silver and thy gold and thy wives and the children, yet I will send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time, and they shall search thy house and the houses of thy servants, and it shall be that whatsoever pleases in their eye, they shall put in their hand and take it away. In other words, I'm going to send my guys over here, and this is going to clean house. They're going to walk all around your area, your land, whatever they want to take, they're going to take, okay? Now, what this indicates is, of course, he did not want to make peace anyhow. You know, one of the ways you know that somebody really doesn't want to make peace with you is when they offer you terms for peace that are unacceptable, that you can't meet, okay? There are people, you know, in my ministry, our ministry here, that said, well, if you will do this, I'll be happy to be part of your church. Well, that's fine, but we don't do that. That's not right. So we're not going to do that. You're offering us terms we can't accept. That's true in relationships, right? I've had friends that I love and care for and prayed with and cried with, and they decided to go sideways on some things, and they just made it impossible. Okay? Sometimes it happens. But here, you had this happen. Now, I want you to understand three things about the grace here. First of all, it was undeserving. Because you look, if you would please, at chapter 16. Go back to chapter 16 and look at verse 30. Okay? I've tried to pick out individual verses just to highlight the narratives here. Okay? But look at 16:30. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. This was a wicked king. A wicked king that did not deserve what was about that. God was about to step in and deliver him out of a mess. Okay? Now what that tells me is this, that I need to stop trying to negotiate with God when I need his grace. And say, God, you know, I promise I'll do this if you will do this. Like we're making a deal with God. Tonight, if you need God's grace, don't try to make a deal. Don't try to bargain with him. Just humble yourself and say, God, I need your grace. I need you. I can't do this. I can't deal with this. I don't know what to do. How many times have you had that in your life? You just don't know what to do. You don't know how to respond. You want to fix it, and you know what the answer is, but it's just not where. What do you do? Grace is undeserved. So, if you're a heavy burden tonight, and you've made some maybe unwise choices in your life recently, don't think that your unwise choices are greater than God's grace. Okay? But second, did the impossible. Look at in chapter 20. As this goes back, there's some negotiation going back and forth. Now finally, because they now come and say, I'm going to take everything in the country, he has to call his elders, his not his co-rulers, but his advisory team, the leaders of the area, and say, hey, this is what the guy wanted us to do. Look at verse 8. And the elders and all the people said unto him, hearken not unto him, nor consent. They say, don't do say. That's like giving away. What's the point? They take our wives and our kids and everything we have, then what's the point of winning? Or the peace. Remember this. Peace at any cost is a price you can't afford for that which will not sustain. So peace at any cost in any relationship is a price that you cannot pay and an experience that you will not sustain you, because you cannot have peace at any cost. All right? So what happens? Well, look at verse 9. Therefore, he said unto the messenger, Ben-Hadad, tell my lord the king all that thou didst send for to thy servant. At first, I will do. In other words, you can have my stuff, but the thing that I may not do. The messenger departed and brought it in. Now, verse 10. And Ben-Hadad sent unto him and said, the gods do so unto me, and more also. Now watch this. If the dust of the Samaria shall suffice for a handful for all the people that follow me. Now, that's a bit wordy in the English translation, but it's a figure of speech. And basically he's saying is, I've got so many men that when I make your place like dust, okay, I have so many men, they would not be able to fill their hands with just your dust because I have too many men. And he's basically saying, I've got you out. It's what Putin has been saying. I've got you outgunned. I've got you outnumbered. Okay? In other words, what he's saying is, militarily speaking, it is impossible for this to go well for you. It's like the 6-day war for Israel. And stuff like that. It's impossible. When God's grace works, it works in the impossible. Now tonight, let me give you a verse to write down. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, a familiar one, verses 9 and 10. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. He said, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I rather glory in my infirmity, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in my infirmities, in my reproaches. Watch this, in my necessities, in persecutions, in distress for Christ's sake. When I am weak, then am I strong. You see, folks, God's grace not only is undeserved, but it also operates in the realm of the impossible. He does things for us that humanly seem it cannot happen. Can I ask you tonight, do not become despair. Do not let despair overtake you. Do not let despair stop you from praying, for asking, for seeking, for knocking. Let me encourage you not to give up on pleading your case before a holy God, that his grace would sustain you and meet your burden tonight and work the impossible. But thirdly, you need to understand that grace is also restrictive. Now, what happens in this narrative is basically this. They whoop up on the king from Syria. I mean, they run him out of town. But then the prophet comes up in verses 13 through 20 and say, listen, they're going to be back in about a year, okay? Verse 20, I think it is. And they slew every one of his men, and the Syrians fled, and Israel pursued after them, and behaving the king of Syria escaped on a horse. He takes off, okay? But look at verse 22. And the prophet came to the king of Israel, the northern kingdom, and said unto him, go strengthen thyself and mark and see what thou doest, for he returneth in a year. So he's going to come back in a year. It's not over. Not over until it's over. He's going to come back. And so he comes back, okay? And he comes back, and verse 23, and the servants of the king of Syria said, now this is the king of Syria's advisors, their gods are gods of the hills. Therefore they are stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than them. You see, in their mindset, these gods had very limited territorial. They were like these small AM or FM stations. You can get this little thing and broadcast for like 100 feet or 200 feet or whatever, that they were really geographically located in their mindset. They thought that they could beat the Israelites if they brought them on different turf, the turf that their gods would come. And of course they lost, big time. But then they told the king of Syria, listen, if you plead with the king of Israel, they're very merciful. And he does, and the king gives him a bunch of stuff back, and he lets him go. But it wasn't God's plan. Because we know, look at verse 42. And he said, thus saith the Lord. And by the way, in verses 35 to 41, you have the prophet that comes to prophesy against Ahab. He comes and he asks a guy to smite him, and he won't do it. And so he says, well, then in verse 35 and then verse 36, because thou hast not obeyed the voice of the Lord, then you're going to you're going to be eaten by a lion. That happened. The second guy smites him. And so the prophet disguises himself. This prophet disguises himself for the king to come. And when he comes, he does much like what Nathan did to David, which was he gave him a story, a narrative to prick his conscience. Look at verse 39 to prepare him for it. And as the king passed by, he cried unto the king. The word he there is the prophet that in verses 35 to 38 had himself smitten, and he disguised himself. Thy servant went out. He's telling them a story. The servant went out in the midst of the battle. And behold, a man turned aside and brought a man unto me and said, keep this man. If by any means he be missing, then shall thy life be for his life, or else thou shalt pay a talent of silver. And as the servant was busy here and there, he was gone. So he's telling him a fictitious story to get him to think of how should he respond. And the king says, and the king of Israel says to him, so shall thy judgment thyself has decided it. He's saying that's what should happen. You either get killed or you pay the talent. Now look at the next verse. And he hastened and took the ashes away from his face, and the king of Israel discerned him to be one of the prophets. So he knows that this was the man of God coming to him. Look what he says in verse 42. And he said unto him, thus saith the Lord, because thou hast let go out of thy hand a man whom I appointed to utter destruction. So evidently, we're not told the revelation earlier, but evidently there had to have been some instruction to Ahab of what he should have done when he beat the king. Therefore thy life shall go for his life, and thy people for his people. And the king of Israel went to his house heavy and displeased, and came to Samaria. That's the capital. So what you have here is a conflict, but you have an expression of God's grace. And we learn from that a couple of things. First of all, yes, God's grace is undeserved. Second, it does the impossible. But when God's grace is working, it is not a free ticket for you to do whatever you want to do. That God's grace comes with responsibility. Okay? And so I have to make sure that as I am resting in God's grace, I am rejoicing in God's grace, I'm dependent upon His grace, I'm pleading for His grace, that I'm also following Him. And the boundaries of obedience, whatever restricts me from doing. There's been an epidemic in the last 20 or 30 years in Christendom, particularly in America, but actually around the world, that tries to hide a bunch of inappropriate activity under the disguise of grace. Grace frees me to do whatever I want. Let's pass the bucket. Let's pass the bottles, okay? Let's have we're grace. Grace allows me to drink. It allows me to do this. It allows me to do that. Well, you got to think that through, Doc. Do not hide behind the grace of God and think that somehow God's grace that is totally undeserved, that has in your life has done the impossible even to this point to some degree, because you're here tonight. You being here tonight is the impossible. Well, you say, how's that so? Because Romans 3 says that on your own you have no use for God. The fact that you're even here, you may not even be saved. You may be saved, I don't know. But the fact that you're even here listening to the Word of God is a demonstration of His grace. But you have to remember, grace is not a license to sin. Okay, so here's the second. That's the first answer. And the second one is the issue of greediness, okay? Greediness, okay? The borders of greediness. Here you have the story of Naboth, and Ahab has a bit of a poochy lip disease. If you have children, or if you're familiar with Patch the Pirate, then you're familiar with the poochy lip disease. It's that disease where the kids, they start pushing out their lip, and they get a poochy lip. They're just mad, or they're upset. They're just pretty narcissistic. You know where they got that from? Dad. Yeah, and mom, but we won't go there tonight, okay? All right, so chapter 21, verse 1, it came to pass after these things, okay, after this victory, that Naboth, Naboth, the Jezreelite, which is a particular city, it's a valley and it's a city. Here would have been a city that would have been near Ahab's property, which was in Jezreel, by the place of Ahab, king of Syria. So his property bordered the king's property. It's a vineyard. Look at verse 2. And Ahab said unto Naboth, say, give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for a garden. He wasn't going to keep the vineyard going. He wanted to plant some tomatoes and cucumbers or whatever. So he was going to mow it down and plant a garden. And of course, verse 3, and Naboth said unto Ahab, the Lord forbid it, that I should give away the inheritance of my father unto thee. Now, this is a very important, we don't dive into it, but the land, the inheritance, all ties into this. I'm not going to sell it to you, okay? And Ahab came to his house, heavy and displeased, because of the word which Naboth, the Jezreelite, had spoken unto him. For he said, I will not give the inheritance of my father. And he laid him down on the bed and turned his face and had a pity party. He's having the poochy lip disease. He's like, oh, I'm so unhappy. He's whining about the whole thing. This is the most greedy guy. God's given him victory. He's the king. Doesn't need the land. He just wants it. Okay? He's greedy. Okay? Now, greediness, my friend, starts with discontentment. That's why you must be very careful about your degree of discontentment. Okay? You must be very careful about being discontent. When we were looking for property 100 years ago here at the church, when we were at the storefront, we reminded ourselves more than once during the process that we're not looking to move because we are discontent where we are. We only want to move if God gives us property which allow us to expand the ministry. You see, discontent is really a really unsafe motive in your life. Because when you're discontent, it's all about you. And so your ability to make wise choices in moments of discontent are very limited, okay? Now, this discontentment is rooted in his desire to change ownership. But also, this discontentment was a desire to change God's plan. Because it belonged to the other guy. If he didn't want to sell it to you, then it was God's plan that he not sell it to you. So remember, discontentment, why don't I write this down? This might be worth actually writing down. Discontentment is always vertical and horizontal simultaneously. When you are discontent, you're not only discontent with what's around you, you're discontent with the God that gave it to you. And so that's the challenge here, okay? And then this discontentment changes your expression and your ability to live with you. He's just pulling a jerky move here in verse 4. I know you men never get discontent. You come home always from work happy and sweet, and when you come home, it's like a ray of sunshine to your wife and your children. That's probably how it is at your house sometime. But the other times when you're not happy about something and you come home and it's just obvious dad's not happy or mom's not happy, because is it not obvious when the kids aren't happy? That's just a given. Is that a given? If the kids aren't happy, don't you see it? Don't you hear it? Okay? And yet, it's expressed in roots, it has roots in his discontentment. But here's the problem with discontentment, okay? That is the root of where greedy starts. It leads to manipulation, okay? This is the expression of it. Then you manipulate. It's like a guy drives a car. It's a perfectly fine running car, but then his buddy gets a new car. There's nothing wrong with buying a new. If you want to buy a new car, knock yourself out. Nothing wrong with it if that guy, like I'll lead you to do it. But his buddy gets a new car. All of a sudden, okay, he starts hearing things in the old car that he's been driving that he didn't hear until his friend got the new car. He's got to explain to his wife why he needs a new car now. He's going to make all these different reasons for the new vehicle, either brand new or just new to him. Okay? You say, but that has never happened. It happens all the time. Not nothing to you, but it does happen to people. Where in their discontentment, they start manipulating events in their life to satisfy that discontented spirit. That's what happens here. Now, Jezebel does the dirty work. Verse 5, and Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said, why is this spirit so sad that thou eatest no bread? And he saith, because I spake unto Naboth and the Jezreelite, and he said, give me thy vineyard, and I will give thee another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give it to you. I mean, I made him a good deal in verse 6. See, in verse 6, he starts manipulating his discontentment by explaining why he was right. I mean, I gave him a good deal. He should have responded here, okay? And so and then his wife steps out. His wife says, verse 7, and Jezebel, his wife, said unto him, dost thou now govern the kingdom of Israel? Arise and eat thy bread, and let thy heart be merry. I will give thee the vineyard. I'll take care of it, honey, okay? And so what happens is they misuse their power and they misuse the system. We're not going to dive into it. She basically gets two false witnesses to come up and to testify falsely against him that he blasphemed God. And in verses 12 through 16, and he gets killed, he gets stoned. So there's manipulation that takes place. Folks, be very careful if you allow your greediness to abound in your life. And one of the ways you know you are greedy is when your basis for making decisions is discontentment with the will of God for your life. Now, the third thing is this, okay, is judgment. That's what happens. Look at verse 22. Okay. Verse 21. Behold, I will bring, this is the prophet coming now to the king. I will bring evil upon thee, and will take away thy posterity, and will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the walls, and no male descendants, and him that shut up left Israel. And in verse 22, I will make thee thy house like unto the house of Jeroboam. Remember, these are kings we talked about before. Jeroboam, okay, and then Baasha, okay. And these are kings whose lines were cut off earlier before him. And then, verse 23, and of Jezebel also spake the Lord, saying, the dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Him that dieth of Ahab in the city, the dog shall eat, and him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat. So he's saying, I'm going to wipe you out. Now it is amazing, even in God's judgment, his grace, because in verses 25 through 29, he actually appears to have a momentary response of humility. And God says, I'm not going to do it during your lifetime, but I'm going to do it after your lifetime to your family descendants. But the fact is that judgment comes. Now, let me tell you something, folks. You cannot live your life as a believer being guided by your discontentment, which is a manifestation of your greed, and thinking you're going to buy with it. You just cannot do it because you're going to make wrong choices. Now, I may make a sidebar application for us as a church. God has been very kind to us, okay? God's been very kind to us the last 23 years. And there are times we had money and times we haven't had money. Times we've had people and then less people, whatever. But we have to make sure that whatever decisions we make as a church family, always made for the right reason, and based on the truth of God's word. And never allow ourselves to get sidetracked with any kind of spirit of discontentment. Okay? And so in our church, as a corporate body, but in each of our lives individually, we have to be very careful with that. Okay? And the third border we're talking about is the border of guidance. Now what happens, look at chapter 22 and verse 1, and there continued 3 years, without war between Syria and Israel. Now Syria, of course, is the capital of the northern kingdom. You have Samaria rather. There's been, let me back up, 3 years without war between Syria, not the capital of Israel. Is Syria, the people they fought in chapter 21. So the battle in 21, the side story here about the vineyard, and now they go back 3 years later. Okay, Syria, there's been no conflict. Remember, in 20, they beat Syria, Syria's on the run, okay? But in the pursuant agreement, the peace treaty with Syria, the king said he would give back certain things to the northern kingdom. And he did some things, but not all of them, and particularly this one location, okay, that's being talked about here, okay, in Gilead. This particular city, location on the east side of the Jordan was critical because it controlled the flow of trade into the heart of Israel. So it's like a border town that was important to them. And they hadn't really taken control of it yet, all right? So there's going to be a battle here, okay? Look at verse 2. And there came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, that's the southern kingdom, came down to the king of Israel. So you have the king of Judah, who's come down, king of Israel, and they're talking, and they make an agreement, an alliance. They were going to go against this city and conquer it, okay? And so that's what's happening here, okay? And so what happens is they are seeking guidance. All right, look at verse 10. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, sat each on his throne, having put on his robes in a void place in the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets prophesied before them. Zedekiah, the son of Chenaanah, made him horns and irons and said, Thus saith the Lord, with these shalt thou push the Syrians until thou have consumed them. Now here's a prophet who comes and said, listen, you're gonna win big time. Verse 12, and all the prophets agreed, okay, with them, that God was going to deliver them into this army into the king's hands. Verse 13, and the messenger that was gone called Micah spake unto him, saying, Behold now, the words of the prophets declared good unto the king with one mouth. Let thy words, this prophet Micah was being called in, please agree with them so that we can have one bit of advice for the kings. Verse 14, and Micah said, As the Lord liveth, what the Lord hath said unto me, that will I speak. So what's happening here is the ministerial association had been called in. And the king said, can we go to battle and win? They said, yeah, you're going to win. 2 thumbs up, king. You're going to wipe them out. You're going to be victorious and come back with victory. They call this particular prophet. Well, let's see what Micah has to say over here. And he says, Micah, would you just be a team player here? Okay, be a company man and just agree with the other prophets so we can all get our little, maybe get a tip and move on with our lives. Verse 15, so he came to the king, and the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we forbear? And he answered him and said, Go and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it into thy hands to the king. Now the king said unto him, How many times shall I adjure thee, that thou tell me nothing but that which is true in the name of the Lord? See, he knew, the king knew he was lying to him, or he was not telling him the truth. He was telling him what he knew the king wanted to hear. I've done that with people before. They're in my office for counseling, and they're trying to save their marriage or their relationship. And I said, well, just leave. Just leave. That's what you want to do? Then leave. And then, well, I don't want to do that. Well, then fix it. Those are your 2 options, right? The guy comes in, he's got other issues in their life. You either do this or you do the right thing. But you got to make a choice. So he's saying something he knows is not true to get the king to respond. verse 17. And he said, I saw all Israel, now he's scattered upon the hills as a sheep that have not a shepherd. What he's saying is, you're not going to make it. These people of Israel now are not going to have a leader because you're going to die. Okay? And of course, he gets upset. Now watch this, okay? When it comes to guidance, it was available. God gave him instructions, okay? God gave him instructions, but it was rejected. Look at verse 26. And the king of Israel said, take Micaiah and carry him back to Ammon, the governor of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, thus saith the king, put this fellow in prison, and feed him with the bread of affliction and the water of affliction until I come in peace. And Micaiah said, if thou return at all in peace, the Lord hath not spoken by me. And he said, hearken, O people, every one of you. The preacher said, that's fine with me. Put me in the dungeon because you ain't coming back, Doc. You're going down. You're going to die. And he said, if you come back, it's because I'm not a prophet of God. Because his guidance was rejected. But watch this. God's guidance is unchangeable. Look at verse 37. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. Now, folks, here's the deal when it comes to God's guidance, okay? God will guide us if we want to be guided. Who of us that are Christians, well, who of us as adults, if we had a child that came to us and said, Dad, Mom, would you show me how to do this? With a humble heart, I want to know how to do this. Would say, well, just figure it out yourself. Now, if you're a loving parent, you'd help the child, right? You'd give instruction. You would help them to find out how to do it. You would guide them, okay? But now watch this. Lack of God's guidance in your life is not because the guidance isn't available. Now, let me stop you and make a side statement. Sometimes God leads us through difficult times, and discovering his will is a process that takes time. I understand that. It's not just, you don't just like ask for a text and it comes, okay? I understand that. But there's never a time in my life or your life, if we trust Lord with all our heart and lean not upon our own understanding, in all of our ways acknowledge him, he's promised to direct our path, okay? So the question is, are you willing to listen to his guidance? That's the key. You see, the king wasn't. And his life ended prematurely because he did not listen to God. Folks, have you ever seen anybody and you thought, you're just hard-headed. You're just stubborn. You're just not listening. You ever seen anybody like that? Have you ever seen anybody like that when you looked in the mirror in the morning? Have you ever seen that? So I want to encourage you to be careful, all of us to be careful, to not forget God's grace, but accept the limits in our life because of his grace. To don't be greedy, that's rooted in my discontentment. But when God gives guidance, let's listen to him. Let's say, yes, sir, and do what we know we should do at the moment. We may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And we'll do today what we know is the next right thing